This is the story of the janitor warned the black millionaire about a betrayal, but no one expected who the traitor was, as it truly unfolded. The marble floors of Sterling Financial gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights at 3 in the morning, reflecting the hunched figure of Marcus Williams as he pushed his cart down the empty corridor. The wheels squeaked with each rotation, a lonely sound that echoed through the towering glass building that housed one of Chicago's most prestigious investment firms. Marcus had been cleaning these floors for 7 years, invisible to the executives who rushed past him during daylight hours, their Italian leather shoes clicking against the very surfaces he polished each night. But Marcus saw everything. He heard everything. And tonight, what he witnessed would change the life of David Sterling forever. If you're drawn to stories where the overlooked become the heroes, consider subscribing so we can explore more tales of unexpected courage together. David Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. At 35, he had built Sterling Financial from nothing, transforming a small community investment firm into a powerhouse that managed over $2 billion in assets. His success story had graced the covers of Forbes and Black Enterprise, a testament to what determination and brilliance could achieve against all odds. Yet tonight, something gnawed at him, a persistent unease that had been growing for weeks. The numbers weren't adding up. Small discrepancies at first, barely noticeable fluctuations in client accounts that his team dismissed as clerical errors. But David's mind, the same analytical instrument that had lifted him from the South Side projects to the pinnacle of Chicago's financial district, detected patterns where others saw randomness. Someone was siphoning money from his clients and accounts, and the thefts were becoming bolder. Marcus had noticed David's late nights becoming more frequent. The young millionaire would pace his office, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see the tension in David's shoulders, the way he rubbed his temples when he thought no one was watching. Marcus understood that kind of pressure. He had carried it himself once, before his world collapsed and cleaning offices became his refuge from a past he couldn't escape. The janitor's cart came to a stop outside the conference room, where David's inner circle had gathered earlier that evening. Marcus began wiping down the mahogany table, his movements methodical and quiet. The executives had left behind their usual debris, empty coffee cups, crumpled papers, and the lingering scent of expensive cologne mixed with ambition. But they had also left something else, something that made Marcus's blood run cold. A single sheet of paper had fallen beneath the table, partially hidden by the leather chair where Jonathan Hayes, David's longtime business partner and closest friend, had been sitting. Marcus retrieved the document, his eyes scanning the printed text that detailed a complex scheme to transfer funds from Sterling Financial's client accounts to offshore holdings. The paper bore Jonathan's signature at the bottom, along with a date that was just 3 days away. Marcus's hands trembled as he read the details. Jonathan Hayes, the man David trusted above all others, the friend who had stood beside him through every challenge and celebration, was systematically stealing from the company they had built together. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that Marcus felt sick to his stomach. He had seen corruption before, had lived through its devastating consequences, but this felt different. This would destroy David Sterling, not just financially, but emotionally. The janitor folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his uniform pocket. He had a choice to make, one that would force him out of the shadows where he had hidden for 7 years. Marcus Williams had once been Detective Marcus Williams of the Chicago Police Department, a decorated officer whose career ended in disgrace when he refused to participate in a corruption scheme that reached the highest levels of the force. His refusal to stay silent had cost him everything: his badge, his pension, his reputation, and ultimately his family. His wife had left, taking their daughter, unable to bear the weight of his principles when those principles left them with nothing. Now, as he finished cleaning the conference room, Marcus faced another moment where silence would be easier than truth. He could pretend he had never seen the document, continue his invisible existence, and let David Sterling discover the betrayal on his own. But the image of David's trusting face, the way the young executive always nodded respectfully when they passed in the hallways, made that choice impossible. The next morning, Marcus waited in the lobby as David arrived for work. The millionaire moved with his usual confident stride, his tailored suit impeccable despite the early hour. Marcus approached him near the elevators, his heart pounding with the same intensity he had felt during his first arrest as a rookie cop. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to speak with you. It's important." David paused, surprised. In 7 years, the janitor had never initiated a conversation beyond polite greetings. Something in Marcus's tone, urgent yet respectful, made David step aside from the stream of employees heading to the elevators. "What is it, Marcus?" The use of his name surprised Marcus. He hadn't realized David knew it. "Sir, I found something last night. Something you need to see." Marcus glanced around the busy lobby, noting the security cameras and the curious glances from passing employees. But not here. Somewhere private. David studied the janitor's face, seeing something there that made him nod. "My office. 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes felt like hours to Marcus as he rode the service elevator to the 42nd floor. He had rehearsed what he would say, how he would explain not just what he had found, but who he really was. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Marcus walked down the familiar corridor that looked so different in daylight, bustling with activity and purpose. David's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, looked puzzled when Marcus appeared at her desk. "Mr. Sterling is expecting me," he said simply, and she buzzed him through to the inner office. The corner office was even more impressive during the day, with natural light streaming through the windows and illuminating the awards and photographs that lined the walls. David sat behind his desk, his expression curious but guarded. Marcus closed the door behind him and approached slowly, pulling the folded document from his pocket. "I found this in the conference room last night," Marcus said, placing the paper on David's desk. "I think someone is trying to steal from your company." David's eyes widened as he read the document, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally, a devastating sadness. The signature at the bottom belonged to his oldest friend, the man who had been best man at his wedding, who had celebrated every success and supported him through every failure. Jonathan Hayes, his partner in business and in life, was planning to rob him blind. "Where exactly did you find this?" David asked, his voice hollow. "Under the table where Mr. Hayes was sitting. It must have fallen when he was leaving." Marcus paused, watching David's face crumble as the reality sank in. "Mr. Sterling, there's something else you should know. About me." David looked up, his eyes still processing the betrayal revealed in the document. "My name is Marcus Williams, but I used to be Detective Marcus Williams. I worked financial crimes for 12 years before—" Marcus's voice trailed off, the old shame rising in his throat. "Before I lost everything for refusing to look the other way." The revelation hung in the air between them. David set the document down and leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with new eyes. "You're a cop. Was a cop. Now I clean floors and try to stay invisible." Marcus straightened his shoulders, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, the weight of responsibility for someone else's welfare. "But I couldn't stay invisible when I saw this. You don't deserve what he's planning to do to you." David stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The city sprawled below them, indifferent to the human drama unfolding 42 floors above the street. "Jonathan and I started this company together 8 years ago. We were broke, working out of a shared office space in Chinatown, surviving on ramen noodles and dreams." His voice was thick with emotion. "I trusted him with everything. My money, my reputation, my future. Trust is a luxury people like us can't afford," Marcus said quietly. "I learned that the hard way." David turned from the window, his expression hardening with resolve. "What would you do if you were me?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond the immediate crisis. Marcus felt the familiar weight of moral choice, the same burden that had cost him his career but preserved his soul. "I'd gather evidence, real evidence that would hold up in court. Then I'd make sure he faces consequences for what he's done." Marcus paused, meeting David's eyes. "But I'd also be careful. Men like Hayes don't go down quietly, and they usually have contingency plans. What would you do if your closest friend betrayed you in the most devastating way possible?" The question that David faced in that moment is one that tests the very core of who we are. Over the next 3 days, Marcus and David worked together in secret, the former detective using skills he thought he had buried forever. They discovered that Jonathan's theft was far more extensive than the single document had revealed. Using his access to the company's systems and his knowledge of David's habits, Jonathan had been systematically draining client accounts for over 6 months, transferring the money through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The total theft exceeded $12 million, enough to bankrupt Sterling Financial and destroy the lives of hundreds of clients who had trusted David with their life savings, retirement funds, college accounts, small business investments, all of it flowing into Jonathan's personal accounts while he maintained the facade of loyal partnership. Marcus's investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Jonathan had been documenting David's every move, recording private conversations, and building a file that would allow him to frame David for the theft when the scheme was finally discovered. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Jonathan would position himself as the whistleblower who discovered David's corruption, emerging as the hero while his former partner faced criminal charges. "He's been planning this for months," Marcus explained as they reviewed the evidence in David's office late one evening. "Maybe longer. Every conversation you've had with him, every decision you've made, he's been calculating how to use it against you." David stared at the photographs and documents spread across his desk, evidence of a betrayal so complete it seemed almost impossible to comprehend. "I don't understand. He has everything he could want. Money, respect, success. Why risk it all for this?" Marcus had seen enough corruption to understand the psychology behind it. It's not about the money. It's about power, about proving he's smarter than everyone else, including you. Some people can't stand being in someone else's shadow, even when that shadow provides them with everything they have. The janitor's insight cut deep because it revealed a truth David had been avoiding. Jonathan had always harbored resentment about David's success, subtle comments about how lucky David had been, how his story resonated with investors because of his background. The resentment had festered in silence, growing into something toxic and destructive. As they prepared to expose Jonathan's scheme, Marcus felt a familiar surge of purpose that he hadn't experienced since his police days. Working alongside David, he remembered why he had become a detective in the first place, the satisfaction of protecting the innocent and ensuring that justice prevailed over corruption. But he also felt the old fear, the knowledge that speaking truth to power came with a price that he might not be able to afford again. The confrontation came on a Friday morning, in the same conference room where Marcus had found the incriminating document. David had arranged a meeting with Jonathan under the pretense of discussing a new investment opportunity. Marcus waited in an adjacent office, recording equipment hidden throughout the room, ready to capture whatever confession they could obtain. Jonathan arrived precisely on time, his usual confident smile in place as he greeted David with the casual warmth of old friendship. He wore an expensive suit that Marcus recognized as costing more than his own annual salary, a Rolex that caught the morning light, and the easy manner of a man who believed himself untouchable. "You look tired, brother," Jonathan said, settling into his chair with practiced ease. "You've been working too hard lately. Maybe it's time for that vacation we talked about." David forced a smile, his hand steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about some irregularities I've noticed in our accounts. Small things, but they're adding up." Marcus watched through the slightly open door as Jonathan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of calculation that lasted only a fraction of a second before his concerned mask slipped back into place. "Irregularities? What kind of irregularities?" Jonathan leaned forward, his voice carrying just the right note of professional concern. "You know I've been handling most of the account management lately. If there's a problem, I need to know about it." "That's just it," David said, sliding a folder across the table. "The problems seem to be concentrated in the accounts you've been managing personally." Jonathan opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents that detailed every theft, every fraudulent transfer, every piece of evidence that Marcus had helped David compile. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of exposed truth. When Jonathan finally looked up, his mask had completely fallen away, replaced by something cold and calculating that David had never seen before. "You've been busy?" he said quietly. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to document everything. Long enough to trace the money to your offshore accounts. Long enough to realize that you've been planning to frame me for your crimes." David's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the pain in his eyes. "The question is why, John? Why destroy everything we built together?" Jonathan laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. "Everything we built? You mean everything you built while I did the actual work? You think I don't know how this looks to the outside world?" David Sterling, the brilliant young entrepreneur who pulled himself up from poverty, the inspiring success story that investors love to fund. His voice dripped with years of suppressed resentment. "And what am I?" "The supporting character in your narrative. the loyal partner who helps the hero achieve his dreams. The revelation of Jonathan's true feelings hit David like a physical blow. I never saw it that way. We were partners. Equals. Equals? Jonathan's voice rose slightly before he caught himself, glancing around the room as if suddenly aware they might not be alone. When was the last time a magazine wanted to interview me? When was the last time someone called me a visionary or a role model? I'm just the white guy who happened to be standing next to the real story. Marcus felt a chill as he recognized the toxic mixture of racism and entitlement in Jonathan's words. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about a man who couldn't bear to see his black partner succeed beyond him, who had twisted their friendship into a narrative of personal victimization. "So you decided to destroy me," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To steal from our clients, ruin their lives, and frame me for your crimes. I decided to take what I deserved," Jonathan replied, his composure returning. "And yes, I planned to let you take the fall. It would have been poetic justice, really." The golden boy brought down by his own greed. The confession was everything Marcus had hoped for, but hearing it spoken aloud made him sick to his stomach. He had seen corruption motivated by greed, by desperation, even by misguided loyalty. But this was something darker, a betrayal rooted in racial resentment and narcissistic rage. David stood slowly, his hands trembling with suppressed emotion. "You're done, John. I'm calling the FBI, the SEC, and every regulatory body that has jurisdiction over our industry. You're going to prison, and you're going to pay back every penny you stole." Jonathan's laugh was genuinely amused this time. With what evidence? A few documents that could easily be forgeries, circumstantial financial records that could be explained away by a good lawyer. He leaned back in his chair, his confidence returning. "You forget that I know every detail of how this company operates. I know where the real vulnerabilities are, and I know exactly how to make this look like your scheme, not mine." It was then that Marcus stepped into the room, a small recording device in his hand and a badge hanging from a chain around his neck. Not his old police badge, but a new one, Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Actually, Mr. Hayes," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority he had thought lost forever. "We have everything we need." The color drained from Jonathan's face as he stared at Marcus, his mind struggling to process this impossible development. "You're a janitor," he whispered. "I was a janitor," Marcus corrected. "Before that, I was a detective, and for the past 3 months, I've been an undercover federal agent investigating financial crimes in Chicago's investment sector." He set the recording device on the table, its red light still blinking. "We've been watching Sterling Financial as part of a broader investigation into industry corruption. When David brought his suspicions to the FBI, we realized we had an opportunity to catch you in the act. The truth was more complex than Marcus's explanation suggested, but it served its purpose." David stared at Marcus in shock, realizing that their partnership had been orchestrated by forces beyond his understanding. The FBI had indeed been investigating financial crimes in the sector, and when David had contacted them about the irregularities he had noticed, they had revealed Marcus's true identity and proposed the undercover operation. Marcus had volunteered for the assignment, seeing it as a chance to redeem himself and return to the work that had once given his life meaning. The past 3 days hadn't been about a janitor helping his boss. They had been about a federal agent building a case that would stand up in court. Jonathan's composure finally cracked completely. "This is entrapment. You can't use anything I said here." "Actually, we can," Marcus replied, producing a warrant from his jacket pocket. "You confessed to multiple federal crimes in the presence of a federal agent. Your admission of guilt, combined with the financial evidence we've gathered, gives us everything we need to prosecute." As if summoned by some invisible signal, the conference room door opened and 3 FBI agents entered, their badges clearly visible. Jonathan Hayes, the man who had planned to destroy his best friend and steal millions from innocent clients, was placed under arrest in the same room where he had plotted his betrayal. David watched in stunned silence as his former partner was led away in handcuffs, the reality of the situation still sinking in. When the room was finally empty except for Marcus and himself, he turned to face the man he had thought he knew. "How much of it was real?" David asked. "Our conversations? Your story about being a disgraced cop? The way you helped me?" Marcus removed the badge from around his neck and set it on the table. "The story about losing my career was real. I did refuse to participate in a corruption scheme, and I did lose everything because of it. The FBI recruited me 2 years ago, gave me a chance to rebuild my life by fighting the same kind of corruption that destroyed it." He paused, meeting David's eyes. "But my respect for you, my anger at what Hayes was doing to you and your clients, that was all real." The revelation brought a complex mix of emotions. David felt grateful for Marcus's intervention, but also manipulated by the deception. "So I was just part of an investigation. You were a victim who deserved justice," Marcus corrected. "And then you were a good man who reminded me why this work matters. When I saw what Hayes was planning to do to you, it stopped being just about the case. It became personal." Over the following weeks, as Jonathan Hayes's crimes were exposed in detail, the true scope of his betrayal became clear. He had stolen not just from Sterling Financial, but from 3 other investment firms where he had worked previously. His pattern of behavior stretched back nearly a decade, a trail of financial destruction that had ruined dozens of lives and cost investors over $50 million. The media coverage was intense, with David's story becoming a symbol of resilience in the face of betrayal. But unlike the previous coverage that had focused on his rise from poverty, this story highlighted his moral courage and his willingness to seek justice, even when it meant exposing his closest friend's crimes. Marcus testified at Jonathan's trial, his transformation from janitor to federal agent becoming a subplot that captured public imagination. His story of redemption, of finding purpose again after losing everything for doing the right thing, resonated with people who had faced their own moral crossroads. Jonathan Hayes was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to his victims. The judge, in delivering the sentence, noted the particular cruelty of his betrayal of David Sterling and the racial animus that had motivated his crimes. David rebuilt Sterling Financial stronger than before, implementing new oversight procedures and transparency measures that became industry standards. He established a whistleblower protection fund to support employees who reported financial crimes, naming it the Marcus Williams Foundation in honor of the man who had saved his company and his reputation. Marcus accepted a permanent position with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, his undercover work having proven his value to the Bureau. But he also maintained his friendship with David. The 2 men bonded by their shared experience of betrayal and redemption. On a quiet evening 6 months after Jonathan's conviction, David and Marcus stood in the same conference room where the confrontation had taken place. The space had been redecorated, the mahogany table replaced with a modern glass surface that seemed to symbolize the transparency that now defined Sterling Financial. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found that document?" David asked, looking out at the city lights that sparkled below them. Marcus considered the question, thinking about the chain of events that had led them to this moment. "I think you would have figured it out eventually. You're too smart and too careful to let something like that slide forever. But would I have figured it out in time? Before he destroyed everything?" David's voice carried the weight of someone who had stared into the abyss and seen how close he had come to falling. "Maybe, maybe not. But that's not what happened. What happened is that someone who had been invisible for 7 years decided to step into the light when it mattered most." Marcus smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced since his police days. "Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never see coming." David nodded, understanding the deeper truth in Marcus's words. In a world where betrayal often came from those closest to us, salvation sometimes arrived from the most unexpected sources. The janitor who cleaned the floors had become the guardian who protected everything David had built. As they prepared to leave the office, David paused at the door. "Marcus, I need you to know something. When I thought you were just the janitor, I respected you. But knowing who you really are, knowing what you sacrificed to do the right thing, that doesn't just earn my respect. It earns my admiration." Marcus felt tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in years. "Thank you, David, for giving me a chance to remember who I used to be, who I still am." Underneath everything, they walked together toward the elevators, 2 men whose lives had been forever changed by a single moment of moral courage. Behind them, the conference room stood empty, its glass table reflecting the city lights like a mirror that showed not just what was, but what could be when people chose truth over comfort, justice over silence. The story of David Sterling and Marcus Williams became more than just a tale of financial crime and federal investigation. It became a reminder that heroism often comes from unexpected places, that the people society overlooks may be the very ones who possess the courage to stand up when it matters most. In a world where trust is fragile and betrayal cuts deep, their friendship stands as proof that redemption is possible, that second chances can lead to first-rate outcomes, and that sometimes the most important conversations happen between people who never expected to know each other's names. If this story of unexpected heroism and second chances brought you hope, share it with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters, no matter how invisible they might feel.